Heads Together is a series of fireside chat brought to you by Room to Read, an organization working with the belief that world change starts with educated children. In this series, we are going to be bringing together entrepreneurs, academicians, policymakers, and education leaders to dive deep into the most urgent and the vital questions around the early grade education, girls' education, inclusion, life skills, and gender inequality. So let's put our heads together to find a creative solution and the offerings. Hi, I'm Purnima and I'm going to be your host for this series of Fireside Chat. Dr. Shailaja Menon works as a faculty in the area of language literacy and children literature with the School of Education with Azim Premji University. From 2017 till 2019, she led the Early Literacy Initiative at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Hyderabad, a unique initiative dedicating to raising awareness and building knowledge about the teaching and learning of early literacy in Indian context. Prior to that, she led a longitudinal project, Literacy Research in Indian Languages, which examined the teaching and learning of early language and literacy in Maharashtra and Karnataka. Shailaja ji completed her PhD at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and has taught at the University of Colorado before returning to India. She is a co-editor of the volume Childhood in India, Traditions, Trends and Transformations. Her publications have appeared in international and Indian journals. She has an abiding interest in imparting a love for language, literature and literacy to children, teachers and teacher educators. Thank you, Shailaja ji. Thank you for accepting our invite for the series of Fireside Chat. And it is really important to hear your thoughts on such an important topic, which is how do we build a reading culture in our country? And as we talk a lot about this subject, this topic, there's always been this question that is there really a reading crisis in our country? Do you really believe in that? And if so, what is the kind of crisis this is?
Very interesting question you posed to me. When I hear the word crisis, to me it feels like things were better earlier and now suddenly they have slipped, they have deteriorated in some way, it's fallen so badly that we need to be worried about it. But if you look historically, right after the time of independence or around the time of independence, the 1951 census shows that just 18% of the population could read and write at that point. And in 2011, 74% of the population say that they can read and write. So historically, never before have so many people in our country been able to read and write. So then why is it that we educators, teachers, parents as a country, we are feeling experientially a sense of crisis? So I would suggest that this crisis that we are experiencing is caused by a mismatch between where the population largely is and where we expect them to be. So modern societies, modern economies, we have certain ideas of what we mean by literacy and what kinds of things we want our literate population to be able to do. And our population is not able to do that. So the crisis that we are talking about is not that fewer people are reading and writing now than before, but that despite so many more people reading, they are not reading and writing in the manner that we expect them to do. So this is a cultural gap more than a statistical, some decline.
Okay, that sounds interesting, and this word culture gap is something that I would like to dwell a little bit more on. And generally a culture gap is at times perceived as a skill gap. So do you think that if we taught our children just the reading and the writing, we would be just better off? I mean, we've just done the things right. So what is this cultural gap, if you could tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm not trying to imply that a cultural gap doesn't mean that there is a skill gap. certainly skills are part of what the culture expects you to do. So skills would definitely be one part of it. But my argument is that fixing this issue at the skill level, getting that 74% literate population to hit 99% or 100% is not going to solve this experiential crisis in our country. We are still going to be feeling that we are in a state of crisis with the reading and writing of our children, because there's so much more to reading and writing than meets the eye, and it's not just about being able to sign your name or decoding the script accurately. So let me explain a little bit about what I mean by cultural gap. Reading and writing, if you look at it historically, if you look at it across cultures, if you look at it across classes within a given society at a given moment in time, what we mean by reading and writing sort of varies a lot. So there is this theory that, initially human beings developed scripts because we needed to keep track of count of our cattle, and because we wanted to keep track of trades that we did with other human beings. So we needed to keep a system to keep track of things, and that's where the origin of the script came from. This is one theory. So such a very instrumental, useful way of thinking about reading and writing. Do we still have evidence of those skills, making a mark to keep track of the days of the calendar, trying to read time, reading bus numbers? In contemporary society, if we look at it, there are still these very instrumental ways in which the script is used, whether it's a numeric script or the written script. We use the written world in very narrow instrumental ways to serve certain purposes, so that kind of purpose still exists. But so much has got laid on to this, what we do with scripts over time. So, historically, we also know that there have been groups of people who have accessed the script in order to access religious information. So, for example, Christian missionaries teaching the script so that people can read the Bible, or, Vedic education being given to a certain group of people, or madrasas teaching Muslim children to read and write so they can read the Quran. These are all examples of using the script to access religious information. Now that's a cultural practice. What you're doing with the script is a cultural practice. Likewise, if you think about the European Renaissance, and you think about this reading for leisure, pleasure, individual response, all of this is a product of the Enlightenment period and European Renaissance. Prior to that, people never thought about reading and writing in these ways.
Sure.
It was for particular purposes, like to become a better human being or to keep track of your accounts and all of that. Suddenly, it's like we are reading because it gives us pleasure. This is unheard of, and even today I would argue that it is restricted to a very elite group of people. So even in, for example, in 1790 in the United States, there is some evidence to show that 80% of the population of certain states was literate functionally, but very few of them were, for example, reading magazines for pleasure or leisure and all of that. And today a higher percentage of the population in the United States might be doing that. But if you look at our country, it is this kind of an idea that you read in order to say, I like this book, I didn't like this book, I enjoyed it. Those kind of uses of literacy, these are highly class and education specific. So it's a particular culture of reading and writing that we are now valuing as a society. And another example I can think of is when we talk about democracies and needing literate citizens for democracies. What do we mean by we need literate citizens in a democracy? Is it that we want them to be able to sign their names? Yes, we want them to be able to sign their names, but we want them to, when we talk about literate citizens in a democracy, we want critical thinking skills, we want people who know their rights, we want people who know how to critique, using the scripts in order to do it. So using reading and writing in particular ways to shape their lives, and how people have historically used reading and writing to shape their lives is a set of cultural practices that we are embedded in. I'm not trying to say it's one or the other at any given point in time. We are all embedded in multiple cultural practices, and we are learning to navigate our way of using scripts through all these textual worlds. So that's what I mean by reading and writing as cultural practices more than as just skills.
That's a very, very interesting point that you have made, and especially, how you talked about that literacy goes beyond just writing your name or signing it off. So it has to do more than what is expected or how it is defined in our system. Another very, very interesting point that really fascinated me is, you talked about this, the idea of reading as a cultural practice. So, do you think as educators we should start working on transformation of the cultures, or we should attempt to do this transformation, or we should just simply leave the cultural practices alone and focus just on skill building? So, what's your idea on that?
Skill building is always embedded in cultural practice. There is no skill building. It's like, it's not floating around in vacuum. What do I do with the skill? That is always located in a time and a place and a set of ideas about what we can do with the skill. So it is almost impossible to engage in this pure kind of skill building and let the culture take care of it effort, even if you're not explicitly thinking of it or theorizing it as a cultural practice. For example, let us say that you just go into a community and introduce English speaking skills. But what does a person do with these skills? That the skill building will transform that person, transform their positioning within that society. It will transform their interactions with others. It will transform other people's expectations. Oh, this is an English speaking person. Now I can go to this person for X, Y and Z. And lo and behold, that person will be embedded in using the skills in a particular cultural context. So irrespective of whether you see reading and writing as cultural practices at a theoretical level or not, I would argue it's impossible to separate. Now you've asked another very interesting question, which is also morally fraught, like should we engage in a process of cultural transformation? After all, we Indians have been, sort of subject to so many centuries of colonial imperialism and ideas about, how the white man's burden and people coming in believing their culture is superior to ours and trying to transform us. So we in particular would be very, very worried about going in assuming that certain kind of cultural practices are better than others, or sort of seeming to demean other people's cultures. That is a very ethically, morally fraught issue. But I would argue that some way we need to keep this issue of power in mind, unequal power variability within our society. We do not live at all in an equal society. And some of us, we know how to engage as powerful people do. We know what, Lisa Delpit, who's this African American educator in the United States of great renown, and she talks about it as the codes of power. And why does she call it the code? It's a code because only the people who possess it know how to read it. Others don't know. So we give education to everybody, but we recognize each other by various telltale signs of the codes of power which the privileged, the elite keep to themselves. So she made this argument that people who have accessed these codes of power, for example, in the United States, middle class, white, well-educated people, should make these codes explicit to all. And likewise in our country also, if we truly want to create a more equal culture, we have to make these codes of power explicit. So when we talk about a reading culture, which is the topic of today's conversation, what are the codes of power that educated middle class Indian parents automatically give to their children? One is, we model that reading and writing can be used in a wide variety of ways. For example, there will be newspapers in our home, there may be magazines, there may be books we pick up at the airport for reading on a flight. We may show them how we are using our laptop at work. So many different ways that we model without even thinking for our children that reading and writing are valuable activities. We have a wide range of reading and writing materials. So we give access to a variety of texts, we give access to knowledgeable adults who model, whether consciously or subconsciously, to children that here are some ways in which this is useful to you. And so we slowly socialize them into this way, and then we teach them, we ask them things like, so what did you think about this book? Did you like it? And suddenly they realize, oh, my opinion matters, somebody is asking me for my opinion.
Yeah,
Who would ask a child in a government school, in an average government school in a village somewhere in India, what did you think about this book? Rather, it will be a set of routine comprehension questions. Kisne kisko kya kaha? Who said what to whom, when, why? These are the kinds of questions we ask our children. We'll never ask them, did you like it? Could you relate to it? Which part did you like? Which part did you not like? These are the codes of the elite and how the elite relate to textual worlds that are safely kept away from the eyes and knowledge of children from more disadvantaged groups. So I would argue, along with Lisa Delpit, that while cultural transformation must be undertaken consciously and sensitively, to not give access to these codes of cultural power is also, it would be a gross omission on our parts. So it's better to be conscious about these things than to do it in an unacknowledged manner, that it is a cultural transformation project. For formal education, all of schooling is a cultural transformation project. So if you believe in schooling for children, that's a cultural transformation project as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about the cultural transformation, and this project honestly seems to be a very daunting task. I mean, do you think there are any cultures that are supportive of this reading culture? This transformation has already been existing in some of the culture, or can you give us some of the examples how we can create this culture change that can build a supportive reading environment?
You are asking this at a point when all the local bookstores are needing to sell lipsticks and flower pots, flower vases in order to stay afloat. So even, I think in our country, even the most elite population, whether we have a robust reading culture, I would say is, something is debatable. So definitely there are a variety of different kinds of reading materials in such homes, but whether educated adults themselves in our society engage in reading for pleasure, leisure, etc. is something that is debatable. I would say it is very thin. But let us, for the moment, for argument's sake, let us assume that there's a robust reading culture in this segment of the population and set them aside and think about the vast majority of our population that does not belong to this thin elite group that I'm referring to. It is definitely a very daunting task to think about cultural transformation. How would you engage with it in terms of creating a reading culture? So, one way we could think about it is, maybe material, spaces, actors, activities, some kind of a framework if we think about it. So materials, like, do we have enough material? So reading good literature for children, do we have enough of that? And especially, now the National Education Policy 2020 has said that we need to focus on children's mother tongues. Not clear whether we mean mother tongue, whether we mean regional language, do we mean tribal languages. In any case, we know that there are thousands of mother tongues in our country. So if we are with NEP 2020 as educators and we genuinely want to sort of turn this into an implementable vision, we would need to focus on production of quality materials. That is a no-brainer in a variety of languages. So that is a no-brainer. Then I would think that in terms of spaces, the government would definitely need to plan and invest seriously in, funding public libraries, funding school libraries, etc. Now, another thing I just wanted to say is that, one of the transformations is that we are a largely oral culture, and we are trying to move people rapidly into textual worlds, right? So, there are many differences between the worlds of orality and textuality. But one of the key differences is that when we have oral interactions, for example, what I'm having with you, it's like face to face, we do things together, we get instant feedback from each other. Whereas, in the literate worlds, at least initially when you're sitting with a book, it can seem like a very lonely task. It's just you and the book, and meaning making seems to be somewhere between you and the book. It's not shared by an entire community or group of people. So one of the things that successful projects have sort of succeeded in showing some evidence of cultural transformation, they have bridged this oral and written worlds of people. So let me just give you an example. There is this organization called the Organization for the Promotion of Early Literacy, for Early Literacy Promotion, OELP, that works approximately in Ajmer, Rajasthan area. And they have been running this very successful endeavor called Kahani Mela. In Kahani Mela, and there's affiliated idea is Potli Baba or something to that effect. I'm forgetting the exact name of those projects, but Kahani Mela is one of them, where the children were asked to go and collect folklore from their community. And of course, this folklore came in oral forms from the community, from the elders. They engaged, they collected folk histories, they collected folk geography, they collected folk stories, they collected folk art, all of this. And they also, in some versions of this project, the teachers also read out a book to children and then asked them to go read it out to the elders. So there was some kind of an exchange between the oral and the written worlds. But then very interestingly, OELP also asked the communities to take ownership, from finances to logistical arrangements to everything, of showcasing what their children had done. So, you know, literally hundreds of villages came together in small groupings where the children shared, the community members shared, and this was a very different kind of sharing than inviting parents for a school exhibition or something where the parents have really not contributed. Here the communities had real ownership. So when this entire community participates in this kind of an event, transformation has been seeded. I'm not saying it's complete, but it has been seeded. Now let us leave this level of community level transformation and let us look at smaller cultures, for example, cultures of teachers. So Azim Premji University conducts this annual children's literature festival called Kathavana. And I'm part of this effort, and for years we would call teachers and tell them how to teach literature to children and how to engage children meaningfully. But suddenly we realized that, slowly we realized, not suddenly, that the teachers themselves, the cultures in which the teachers themselves had been socialized, had not given the teachers opportunities to experience reading as for leisure, for pleasure, for personal response, for critique, etc. So how can you teach what you yourself have not experienced? So changing the culture of teachers and teaching and teacher knowledge became a focus of Kathavana, and we instituted what we called, you know, teachers as readers and teachers as writers circles, where, you know, teachers would come in, they would sit in a group, they would read a short story, they would discuss it with each other using, it was facilitated, so we would ask certain questions to get them thinking along certain lines. But within an hour or two, you would see teachers who said that they didn't see themselves as readers for pleasure, to suddenly engaging in the most complex literary conversations, and suddenly it's like, now I know how to discuss books with children. Likewise, teachers as writers being taught how to write for themselves in writers' workshops, poetry or short stories or descriptive pieces, and suddenly it's like, I get it now, you know, because I have experienced it. I know how to teach children, and I'm not trying to make it seem very simplistic, like the journey is over. These are all the seeds of journeys that are never ending, but these are other ways in which we can think about cultural shifts. So I've talked about transformation of materials, I've talked about transformation of people, and I've also said, you know, we also need to transform the government level culture of seeding, funding, and putting our weight behind things like public library, school libraries, teacher education, librarians education. So these are the kinds of things that would shift, I think, in the long term, the culture.
Yeah. So while you discussed, cultural transformation at various levels, be it parents, the community, the teachers, the role that they are playing. So, what is that transformation that we need at the government level, at the policy level? So, if you could also talk a little bit about that, that will be very helpful.
Yeah, I think, one of the very welcome things in the National Education Policy 2020 has been this emphasis on what they call foundational literacy. as a literacy person myself, I really welcome that, and I also welcome the document that has followed the Nipun Bharat, where certain aspects, so language is not treated as a composite whole, but they have pulled out and fleshed out different aspects of language that need to be attended to, like oral language and comprehension and writing and fluency and so on and so forth. So it's all wonderful, it's heading in the right direction. But the word of caution from the policy level is that I believe that at their heart they still think that it's a set of skills. So how do you know this? It's also in terms of how they plan to assess progress. It's all in terms of have they met this skill level, this skill level, this skill level. I hope that what I've tried to convey in this brief interaction is that skills are skills and skills are necessary, but skills are not sufficient. We are also trying to build cultures which include knowledge, which include attitudes, which include experiences, imaginations, etc. So we are trying to shift, and we are trying to shift the practices around reading and writing. So it is not just about any volunteer in the community comes and gives remedial tutoring to children, because any volunteer in the community would have also probably gone through the same set of cultural experiences that produced the rest of the community members. And what you're trying to do is sort of, as I'm saying, infuse the culture with some elements of change. It's not change, sorry. It is not to devalue the existing cultures, but to say that if cultures are to be empowered in modern day societies and modern day economies and not be disenfranchised, then certain ways of relating to textual worlds is necessary. And so any odd person off the street cannot come in and teach. We need to invest in very high quality teacher education programs. We need to really start talking about librarian education programs. I mean, where do we hear conversations about that? So we really need to invest in dedicated professionals for our community libraries, the public libraries, as well as the school libraries. So teacher education, ongoing pre-service, policy in terms of creation of new books, policy in terms of having a cadre of dedicated people who could help people engage with and relate to textual worlds. Those are the thoughts that are coming to my mind at present. Is there something else that you would like to add to this list? I'm sorry.
No, I think you said it very, very rightly that we always had this need of having a library in our RT, but how much as a system, as a policy, we've been able to implement it. And you've raised a very important point. So at a policy level, there has to be a change. We need to make sure that children are introduced to more textual world. Children are introduced to variety of literature. So that's another very important point that you've raised. And and I'm sure people who are listening to our show today would really agree to the points that you have made. And it's and some of the important takeaways has been that how this reading crisis has really created a cultural crisis, and where we are seeing gaps of cultural practice, and then how a cultural transformation needs to happen. So I think this is a trajectory that we all need to kind of go through to make sure that there is a system integration for the larger need of creating quality reading material for children and making sure that there is a reading culture in our country. So I think this has been very, very wonderful discussion and very insightful discussion with you. So thank you so much, Shailaja ji. This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much.